All right, this is Cleopatra, daughter of the Nile, a novel by Kristiana Gregory. And this is part 15. We are starting on page 165, and it is the 30th of Aprilis. Oh, it was a sorrowful Berenice who wept at father's feet. He sat on his throne. Once more, Pharaoh told me the 12th, the mighty king of Egypt. He looked at her bowed figure and waved to a guard who removed the purple cloak from her back. He waved again, and my sister was led out of the room. I stood quietly at his side. He smiled up at me, then struck his scepter 3 times against the floor. An official brought the purple cloak to me and ceremoniously draped it over my shoulders. It's a big deal. I bowed to father and backed out of the room. So he's trusting her. He's like, pretty much like, this person deserves to be ruling too. Evening. I write from my chamber. Pharaoh's lighthouse glows above the waves of my home shore. So many months away. I should be more joyful to be here. But something happened today that's made my heart quiet. I wanted to be bold with father about my 2 servants. Neva and Puso love each other. I plan to tell him. I want a royal edict that says they may marry and continue to serve in the palace. The speech was in my mind for days, a persuasive line of reasoning I learned from Cicero. Father would not refuse me, I know. When I appeared before him, there was quite a lot of activity. Dancers off to one side, musicians on the other. Soldiers were standing around. Mark Antony passed me in the corridor on his way out. He dipped his head in greeting, but said nothing. I wanted to talk to him about anything or nothing, but this obviously wasn't the time. When father saw me, he opened his arms wide and smiled. Oh, Cleopatra, he said, you grow more lovely by the hour. What is it you desire, my daughter? He stood near a thick marble column and took a breath. But before my words began, I heard soldiers marching down a hall toward us. Father looked up at the Roman leading the procession and beckoned him to step forward. I turned to look, but was not prepared for the sight awaiting me. Had I been just a girl, I would have fainted. Even so, I placed my hand against the column to steady myself. Blood spilled onto the mosaic floor from a bronze shield that had been carried away. On this tray was the severed head of my sister, Berenice, the first of Maias. I'm still pondering in my heart the events of yesterday, feeling sadness and the terror Berenice must have felt when she realized her fate. Father gave her the ultimate punishment. He showed no mercy at all. Now I'm next in line to the throne. A heaviness weighs on me now that I have seen what father does to a daughter who displeases him. If he gets angry with me or thinks I'm disloyal or wants to make sure I don't become queen, will he order my execution? Will my little brothers and our sinewy try to kill me so that one of them may be pharaoh? Great sorrow overwhelms me. I had thought that once we were home again, away from the Roman territory, I'd be safe. The 10th of Maias. Olympus and I met in the library. Soon Theophilus joined us, a thick scroll under his arm. We were once more old friends, ready to study and talk. It was as if we had not lost one day together. They wanted to know everything about Rome, but they were also curious about Mark Antony and boldly asked if I had affection for the barbarian. I didn't know how to answer. What would they say if I told them about the kiss in the garden? How can I explain to them my heart when there's also sadness and worry? Cleopatra, said Olympus, when you left for Rome, you were just a girl of 12. Now you're a young woman capable of much responsibility. We can see that you're wiser in the way of the world, especially the Roman world. Yes, I said. Theophilus looked up from the scroll he'd been reading. He said, your older sisters are dead. Your father's weak. If he meets an untimely death, you may be pharaoh. Are you ready, Cleopatra? Would you have allies in Rome? I stood and went into the courtyard. My friends didn't follow because they knew I needed time to think. What they say is true. Because of my father, Rome and Alexandria are now linked with each other. For Egypt to survive, I need allies. It's my royal duty to cultivate powerful friends. There's also an unspoken word for ally, husband. Caesar's strong, but I don't know him. Crassus is a politician too greedy to trust. Pompey's crude and so impressed with himself he would not make a loyal friend. Cicero might be worthy and would certainly win opinion in the Senate, but he doesn't command an army. And then there's Mark Antony, a leader of men with a definite charm, I admit. Of all the barbarians, I am most interested in Antony. The 13th of Maius. Last night I was awakened by an unusual sound, soft footsteps. I lay in bed trying to listen, my heart pounding. Who was there? When I realized that neither Pusa or Neva had stirred, terror seized my heart. Had they been murdered in their sleep and now their killer was coming for me? Slowly, I moved my hand down the side of my bed where a dagger is hidden. A shadow low to the ground was crawling toward me. I held my breath, wanting to hear the precise moment when I should stab my attacker. But the sound I heard was purring. Arrow? I whispered. She came to me like an old friend, rubbing her large head against my arm. She licked my hand and rolled onto her side. Oh, I was happy to see her. I hugged her tight while she kneaded her claws into my blanket, purring and telling me all about it. But where she'd hidden all these months, I'll never know. I think the gods that Tryphena had not hunted her down and killed her. I kind of think that probably someone hid her, knew that Tryphena would do terrible things and hid her all that time. To continue, I do not want to write about the bloodshed in Alexandria, but I'll say that Berenice wasn't the only one who lost her head. Now soldiers are camped outside the city walls and along the beaches. Our harbors are crowded with our anchored ships. As Mark Antony is their commander, he's busy with military duties, and he and I haven't seen each other since the day of my sister's execution. Bucephalus was safe in her royal stables. Oh, she was a beautiful sight. Our reunion was brief, though, because of danger in the streets. We will have to wait until things quiet down before taking one of our favorite rides. Meanwhile, I must carry on with my studies. There's so much to learn and prepare for if I become queen. A dispatch from Antony arrived yesterday. It was written by one of his secretaries because he injured his hand in a fight. Troops will be leaving Egypt soon, some by sea, and many will march back into Judea, another Roman province. Antony said it could take a year for him to go around the edge of the continent back to Italy, but I think he wants to take his time, perhaps delaying an encounter with Cicero. It only took them like a week to get there. Word also reached us that Julius Caesar is planning to invade and conquer Britannia this summer. He has 80 warships ready to cross the channel from Gaul. Boy, does he have a surprise when he gets there, but that's for another time. I've written letters to these men, Antony, Cicero, and Caesar, letters of friendship with invitations. I'll welcome seeing them under peaceful circumstances. I wanted to say more to Antony, but didn't know how or what those thoughts might be. The next day, I visited the little ones in the nursery. Our Sinaway is more beautiful than I remember. At 11 years, she clearly rules over our brothers. Ptolemy is 6 and Ptolemy the younger is 4, still babies. For now, they're no threat to father or myself. I've been pondering the sorrows of my heart and have made a decision. If I'm to be queen, I must learn about the Egyptian people, but I can't accomplish this by sitting around the palace. Thus, in 10 days, I'll set sail aboard the royal barge for a trip up the Nile. I want to see the great pyramids, the Sphinx, and all the villages along the way. With me will be my usual guards, cooks, and servants, Puso and Neva, of course, and Arrow, who follows me everywhere now. Olympus has been granted leave from medical school for the purpose of studying native diseases and remedies. My heart soars knowing he'll be my companion. Our friend Theophilus will remain in Alexandria as he's training to be a rabbi. I know he'll be a fine one. When I met with Father in the throne room, I did not tell him the whole story. If he knew my trip was planned for the purpose of making me a good queen, that I'm seeking wisdom and knowledge, he might prefer to kill me. Thus, he's given me his blessing. He believes this adventure is the mere frolic of a 14-year-old girl. Yet he said he's also planning my wedding, which will take place upon my return. It grieves me that I still fear my own father, and that I must marry the man he chooses, but such is the destiny of a daughter and the royal house of Ptolemy. But who this husband is, I do not know. So we're hopping down the calendar to the 12th of Junius aboard the royal barge Isis. Of course, she named her ship Isis. The heat of my Egypt burns down on us all day, but there's shade under our canopy and a slight breeze off the waters. Rowers strain against the river's strong current, sometimes helped when a favorable wind catches our sail. I'm pleased to be once again on a voyage, seeing new things. But this time I'm not frightened of what lies ahead or worried about how others will receive me. Olympus has arranged a desk up here by the mast, which is where I sit now. He does not bother me when I'm writing, nor I him when he is keeping a medical journal. We take turns rotating the hourglass. I look up to see the banks of the Nile slip by. Flocks of herons and flamingos fly up from the marshes, making streaks of blue and pink and white in the sky. The sound of frogs and birds and water lapping against our hull is music to me, beautiful music. There are clusters of mud huts in each village. Egyptian children always playing near the shore. It seems they know where crocodiles hide and are able to keep away from them. My heart's at peace. The only worry for those who travel this broad green river is drowning, often caused by the hippopotamus. These creatures love to hide in the water until the boat comes out and then ram it until the occupants fall overboard. I've seen this happen. But when my guards tried to kill one by beating it over the head with an oar, I stopped them, for Egyptians believe that the hippo is the goddess of childbirth. Compared to the Roman arena, the Nile is as safe as heaven. Late afternoon. We're about to dock at a village called Posat. Donkeys are walking in a circle, pulling buckets of water up from a river by a crude wheel. Children have crowded the bank and already are pointing to our beautiful flags and pennants. Did I mention that during our last stop, I had an Egyptian priest at the temple of Isis marry dear Pusa and Neva? At least on our trip, which may take 2 years, they can have the joy of being married. There are plenty of days ahead for me to think of ways to present this to Father. Time to put my writing tools in my little chest. Local officials and cooks are preparing a banquet among a grove of date palms. Oh, its shade is inviting. I see a child waving to me. Another's throwing sweet scented flowers onto the water. Princess, they're calling. Welcome. We welcome you. I'm going to go ahead and read the epilogue and the historical notes. Epilogue. So, following Egyptian custom, Cleopatra married her brother Ptolemy XIII, and upon their father's death in 51 BC, they became co-rulers. She was 18 and he was 10. So again, it's not necessarily like, it's not a romantic thing, but there should always be a male and female Ptolemy on the throne at all times. So thus we have Cleopatra and her brother. But Cleopatra's 18 and her brother's still a kid. And so for the most part, who do you think people are listening to rule their country? Doesn't bode well for them as siblings. They do not get along in this relationship as being co-rulers. Approximately 3 years earlier, back in Rome, Julia, the beloved daughter of Caesar and wife to Pompey, died in childbirth, leaving him heartbroken. Well, both hymns. Her father was heartbroken. Her husband, Pompey, was devastated. Felt like his life was over. Her untimely death, however, loosened the political ties between the two leaders, Caesar and Pompey, and they stopped pretending to be friends. Pompey realized he was the last obstacle in Caesar's rise to power. And so he fled with his family to Egypt, thinking at one point he had shielded Cleopatra, so maybe she would shield him from Caesar. It says he was hoping to gain asylum with Cleopatra and her brother because at one time they had been under his guardianship. Remember that he is their godfather, so to speak. It was an unfortunate miscalculation. He didn't realize that the 13-year-old Ptolemy, now he's 13, wanted to gain favor with Rome, with Caesar, and wasn't in the least concerned with these old friendships that his father had had. One of Ptolemy's advisors suggested murdering Pompey because, after all, and this became a very popular quote, dead men don't bite. Thus, when Pompey sailed into Alexandria's harbor in the fall of 48 BC and stepped ashore, he was swiftly beheaded, supposedly as his children and screaming wife watched from their boat. When some days later, Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt as conqueror, Ptolemy presented him with a royal gift, the severed, pickled head of Pompey the Great. So Ptolemy gave Caesar Pompey's head, pickled. Pompey's his son-in-law. Okay, it is said that Caesar wept at the loss of his former friend and son-in-law. He did not think it was a good present. He thought this kid was crazy. So immediately they hate each other. Meanwhile, Cleopatra, age 21 at this time, went into hiding because she and brother are in the ultimate brother-sister battle for the ages. She devised a more ingenious way to meet Caesar, who was about 52 years old at the time, by the way. She rolled herself up in a rug, or some say she was put in a scroll tube. But either way, she was somehow hidden and had her servant. And again, it's unclear if this was Puso or Olympus, but it was one of the two, pretty sure, who carried her into Caesar's private quarters to deliver said scroll or rug, whatever. But either way, the person shook her out, and there she was. Not a carpet, not a scroll, but Cleopatra. He was smitten with her. Hey, you're not a carpet. And the two became lovers. And in June 47 BC, a son was born to them, Ptolemy. They're all named Ptolemy. Ptolemy the 15th Caesarion. So now we have a problem here because this child could now rule Egypt and Rome. And Egypt and Rome are kind of like the last two places of this half of the ancient world. And so this poor child is got a big target on his back because anyone wanted to rule Rome or Egypt at this point, they would just need to kill this one poor child. Unfortunately for him, let's see what happens. In 44 BC, Caesar goes back to Rome from Egypt and is assassinated by a group of senators. Assassinated by the Senate. They stabbed him to death on the Senate floor. He was succeeded then by his legal heir, 17-year-old Octavian, who's just a little kid in our story. Now he's 17, and now that Caesar's dead, he can rule Rome. Now, up to this point, Rome had been a republic, so they were ruled by their senators, right? So Caesar had gained a lot of power, just Caesar being Caesar. It's a little more complicated than that, but that simplifies it quite a bit. Now that he's dead and he's left Octavian in charge, there's no longer a Senate. So miscalculation from the Senate here too, right? They killed him so that they could go back to being ruled by a Senate and not one person. But now Octavian's in charge, so didn't work out for them, unfortunately. And then Rome mutates from a republic to now an empire, and Octavian becomes their first emperor. So let's keep going here. It's very confusing, but I'm trying to simplify it as much as possible. By the way, Mark Antony was so mad at Cicero for those things that Cicero had said about him in court. Remember all that? Mark Antony is going to Egypt. Oh, okay. He's so mad at him about that he ordered Cicero's head and right hand be cut off. So he can't talk about him or write things about him anymore. He has neither head nor hands. All right. These were then displayed at the speaker's platform in Rome. It is said that Antony's wife at the time, Fulvia, took out one of her hairpins and stabbed him in the tongue, Cicero, because he had said such terrible things using his tongue about her husband. But that was a long time ago. Well, not that long ago, but before, what's currently happening. A few years after Caesar's death. So we're hopping back ahead. Cleopatra and Mark Antony fell in love, and according to some, were married in an Egyptian ceremony. They had 3 children, twins, named Alexander Helios, Alexander after Alexander the Great, Helios after the sun, and Cleopatra Selene, Cleopatra after Cleopatra, and Selene after the moon. Love it. And then their other son's name was Ptolemy, not to be confused with Cleopatra's son was Caesar, whose name is also Ptolemy. Okay. So this son's name is Ptolemy Philadelphus. Together, they tried to protect the city of Alexandria, for Octavian had declared war on them. What are you thinking, Octavian? In September of 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra, it's a good name for a play, chose to fight a crucial battle at sea, but their fleet was crushed. Months later, Octavian and his army swept into Alexandria, realizing that Egypt would be conquered. Cleopatra arranged for her 14-year-old son, Ptolemy Caesarion, to escape because she wanted to ensure that the Ptolemaic line would continue. He, the son, fled to India. Who would guess he was in India with a large sum of money, but he was murdered when he arrived. So somebody told Octavian the plan, and the plan was foiled. So he's now dead, humiliated by the military defeat. And mistakenly thinking that Cleopatra was dead, Antony, he's very upset. His stepson has just died. Now his wife he thinks is dead. Antony stabs himself with his own sword. It's a hard thing to do, by the way. Roman swords aren't that big. If you ever see a picture of them, they're quite small, but still not an easy thing to do. Not fun. As he bled to death from his wounds, friends carried him to Cleopatra. She was still alive. She was like, what are you doing? Where he died in her arms. But then she too took her life, apparently by allowing a deadly snake to bite her. So as the story goes, she locked herself in a room with just a snake, and the snake allowed the snake to bite her. Poisonous snake, an asp, and she then died. Cleopatra and her physician Olympus remained close friends until her death. After Cleopatra's death, her children by Mark Antony, we're talking Alexander and Cleopatra, and Ptolemy Philadelphus, the other one, were sent to Italy to be cared for by Antony's Roman wife, Octavia. To make things even more awkward, Octavia is Octavian's twin sister. It's a mess. So this was part of why everything was a mess before, and why Mark Antony leaves Rome, because he's forced to marry Octavia, Octavian's sister. Neither Octavia nor Antony were excited to hear that, and Antony just leaves and goes to Egypt to escape that, marries Cleopatra. Poor Octavia is just back in Rome doing her thing. But then when Antony and Cleopatra are killed, their kids are sent to her and she has to raise them. Yay, now you got something to do. So Octavia now has some children. The boys later disappeared. We don't know what happened to them. But the sister, Cleopatra Selene, survived. She married King Juba II of Mauritania. They had 2 kids, Ptolemy, of course, and Drusilla. You thought it was going to be Cleopatra. Some accounts show that Drusilla then married Marcus Antonius Felix, Roman governor of Judea. And so the nobility continues. While in court, it was Drusilla and Marcus Antonius Felix who listened to testimony from the Apostle Paul, who was on trial for believing in Jesus Christ. We know that story from Acts 24:24. And here's a historical note for you to end things. Cleopatra VII was born in 69 BC and she died in 30 BC. And little is known about her younger years. What information survived through centuries often is contradictory and confusing because of the repetitive names of her ancestors. Everybody's Cleopatra, everybody's Ptolemy, and it's so confusing to keep them straight. As a result, researchers often come up with different conclusions, including my own, I'm sure. For example, what did Cleopatra look like? Nobody knows. Some think somehow she got Egyptian blood and may have had dark skin and dark hair and dark eyes, but she was Macedonian Greek. She probably had light skin, blonde hair, green eyes, but we don't know. There's also the question of Cleopatra's age when she met Mark Antony. Some experts say she was a child, that she had met him when she was in Rome, but others say she was older when she met him, maybe in her 20s. With respect to other historical figures and events portrayed in this story, every attempt has been made to be as accurate as possible. It's been said that Alexandria's great library was destroyed by Julius Caesar. He didn't mean to. He was conquering the city. He was in that big fight against Cleopatra's brother. To protect the harbor from Egyptian soldiers and keep them from seizing warships anchored there, Caesar set torches to the fleet, to the ships, right? And the flames spread to the docks, and the dock flames spread to the warehouse, and the warehouse's flames spread to the library. It's unknown how many scrolls and manuscripts were lost in this fire because, again, all the ancient texts of the ancient world were held there, and then they were just gone. That's why you don't put all your ancient texts in one place. But we do have the later writings of Plutarch, which aren't that helpful, but they're something to go on. He was born in Greece about AD 46, and he traveled to Rome and Alexandria, possibly hearing firsthand or secondhand from those who had actually known Cleopatra. And this is what he wrote. Their acquaintance with her was when she was a girl, young and ignorant of the world. Nice. Her actual beauty, it is said, was not in itself so remarkable that none could be compared with her, because she was pretty like other people, or that no one could see her without being struck by it. No. But the contact of her presence, if you lived with her, was irresistible. She was just one of those magical people. Walk in a room, everybody's listening to her. She just had like a very good vibe going when she entered her room. It was a pleasure merely to hear the sound of her voice, with which, like an instrument of many strings, she could pass from one language to another, so that there were very few of the barbarian nations being nations that don't speak Greek, that she answered to with an interpreter. To most of them, she spoke herself, like the Ethiopians, the Troglodytes, the Hebrews, the Arabians, the Syrians, the Medes, the Parthians, and many others whose language she'd learned, which was all the more surprising because most of the kings who were her predecessors, Ptolemies, scarcely gave themselves trouble to acquire Egyptian. Several of them had abandoned Macedonia, and they were just all speaking Greek. Plutarch's comments reveal that's all Plutarch there. Plutarch's comments reveal that Cleopatra was literate, and she was interested in a variety of peoples, right? It's quite plausible that she herself, rather than a scribe, recorded her thoughts and observations. During Cleopatra's lifetime, writers used clay tablets as well as leather parchment and papyrus to record information. These papers could then be glued together side by side and then form one long piece, sometimes up to 30 feet wide, which would then be rolled onto a scroll simultaneously from both ends. Got it? And that's how you make a scroll. These would have then been stored in clay jars. Archaeologists have discovered manuscripts like these. Perhaps the most celebrated discovery was in 1947, when a young Bedouin shepherd wandered into a cave near the Dead Sea in Jordan, and there he found broken jars with leather scrolls written in Aramaic and Hebrew, biblical manuscripts dating back more than 1,000 years earlier than any previously found. These documents and others from nearby caves are thought to have been a hidden library used sometime between 100 BC and 100 AD. So a 200-year span, right? By a Jewish sect. Scholars agree that more stories from the ancient world are yet to be found. It's possible that a diary truly written by Cleopatra lies hidden somewhere. There's no where. Few interesting events that preceded and followed the life of Cleopatra are worth noting. The kingdom of ancient Egypt began before recorded history, approximately 5,000 years ago along the Nile River in Egypt. It lasted longer than any other civilization in the world. Ruled by kings who were also thought to be living gods. Because these rulers believed their lives would continue after death, they built pyramids for their tombs to preserve the body and the earthly treasures for eternity. Considered to be the oldest man-made monuments on earth, these pyramids were engineered and constructed so superbly that dozens are still standing. Perhaps one of the most remarkable is the Great Pyramid built by Pharaoh Khufu during the 2600s BC, near what it is now the city of Cairo, Egypt. As the largest tomb ever built, its base is big enough to hold 8 football fields. It's as tall as a 40-foot skyscraper. In 332 BC, I think I said 331 earlier, Alexander the Great conquered Egypt, adding to its vast empire. After his death, one of his generals, Ptolemy I, established himself as king of Egypt, which began the Ptolemaic dynasty of rulers. This ended when Cleopatra died. She is the last pharaoh of Egypt in 30 BC. And the country was then taken over and added to the Roman Empire, which is part of Rome. 400 years before Cleopatra, Spartan soldiers were using sulfur, pitch, and charcoal as chemical warfare. Approximately 200 years later, so 200 years before the story started, the Great Wall of China was completed during the Qin dynasty. At the time of Cleopatra's death in 30 BC, the magnificent Pantheon was being built in Rome. It wouldn't be finished for another 150 years. Much of the city of Rome was destroyed by fire in 64 AD. Emperor Nero blamed Christians for starting the fire and ordered scores of them to be killed by having them thrown into the arena with lions. As a young girl, Cleopatra may have vacationed in Pompeii and Herculaneum. It's cool to think about. But 100 years after her death, these lovely seaside towns were buried under the boiling lava of Mount Vesuvius. At least 16,000 people died when this volcano erupted in 79 AD in August. After Cleopatra's suicide, Octavian appointed himself Egypt's pharaoh. And as Rome's first emperor, he renamed himself Caesar Augustus. So you'll often hear Octavian being called Caesar Augustus. And that's why he's the first emperor, and they're just calling Emperor Caesar after Julius Caesar, because that was his relative. Some 30 years later, he became linked with the birth of Jesus in the Bible. It says, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. And this is why Mary and Joseph have to go to Bethlehem. That is told in Luke chapter 1, verse 2. Although Cleopatra died young at age 39, she's remembered as one of the most influential women in history because she did have a child with Julius Caesar. She did go to war with Caesar Augustus. She had children with Mark Antony. Plus, she was just a pretty remarkable person herself. Her death marks the beginning of Roman rule in Egypt, and Rome really didn't rule themselves again until like the 1800s. They're going to be like going from the Romans to the British, and they're just, they're out of their luck for a while here. And so I think it's like the 1980s when they rule themselves again. The lights are off, so I guess we go home now. That is the end of our story. If you are reading in the book, there is more info about each person specifically, but it's really hard to follow off script because it keeps bouncing around and you'll be like, who's that person again? Wait, who's that again? So go ahead and read it if you have it, but if you don't, I'm not going to read it to you because it will feel really crazy. You kind of need to look back at other people in order to follow it. And there's a family tree there as well that is really cool. That just helps you visualize, like, here's the Ptolemies and here's how this is all working and here how the kids are working and who they married and all that good stuff. And it's a lot easier than just reading a summary of each person. All right. And that concludes our book, Cleopatra the Seventh, Daughter of the Nile by Kristiana Gregory. Thank you. Bye.